My name is Gwen Reid. I was born in Mosquito. Lived there my whole life, and my family went there in 1861. That was my great great grandfather, Adam Milker. My great grandfather was born there in 1874. And the story I'm about to share with you took place in 1886. Sitting here in Hangtown, I go back 130 years to little Willie Melker, who was trying to face his fear. He got to go to town that day. His dad said he could come. He knew that he and Tommy Carpenter would be having them some fun. Will had washed his face and done his chores before the break of dawn. Dad had hitched the buckboard, and Will helped him load the wares. They might bring $50 to the state of their affairs. Old Pat and Mike stood patiently as the two climbed to the seat. This old team, they knew the trip. They never missed a beat. It'd take them several hours, and the going would be slow. The grade was steep and narrow with the river far below. The first mile would pass quickly, but then they'd stop and wait to see if others pulled the grade. If they hadn't left till daybreak, then they should be okay. Once they reached the top, the horses, they just stopped. Seemed they held their breath. They held their heads and twitched their ears to the right and then the left. They were listening for bow bells. Dad knew they were the best. After several minutes, they began to sigh and stomp. They leaned into the harness. Adam knew then it was safe to take them down the switchbacks, using all the brakes. Dad would pull on one side and Will would pull the other. Once they reached the river, the horses did their job. They knew they had to sidestep to pull the wagon wide. It's how they made the 90 with only inches on each side. The bridge was held suspended high above the gorge, and it would sway and buckle beneath the heavy load. The horses, they'd be nervous. You could see 'em twitch. But Dad would softly talk to them across this narrow stitch. Once across the river, they would heave and sigh. He'd climb down off the wagon and rub above their eyes. He'd tell 'em they were good boys and pet 'em on their sides. Then he'd check the harness, make sure that it was right. Then back up on the wagon to begin that mighty climb. The next 5 miles would be the same as their descent. By the time they reached the top, these horses would be spent. They were worth their weight in gold to the man who held the reins. Without them, his life just simply wouldn't be the same. They'd pull till they reached Lake Francis. Then they'd stop and blow. They'd get a drink of water, and on to town they'd go. The wheat upon the wagon was the reason they had gone. They'd take it to the miller, and from there would carry on to conduct the rest of business to just sustain the farm. Will would help unload the wagon once they got their price. Dad would grin and wink at him once the deal was done, and the miller would look rattled. Will knew then Dad had won. Now the work was over. Will could go and play, check out all the townsfolk and what they had to say. He needed to find Tommy. He knew just where to look. He should be at the livery. He'd have to go and see. If Tommy wasn't working, that's just where he would be, the other end of Main Street, beyond the hangman's tree. As Will passed by Cumbellick's, he heard a miner say, "They're really going to hang him. They're hanging him today." The words he heard gave Will a chill. What an awful way to die. He wondered what this man had done that this would justify. Will could see a group of men outside the gallows wall. This used to be a big event, but the ladies were appalled that it could be seen by everyone, that even children were involved. So now this act of penance was held behind a fence, out of sight and out of mind of those that were incensed. As Will tried to step around the crowd that seemed to grow, he ran right into Tommy. He guessed he should have known. But Tommy wouldn't let this pass without his presence shown. If there was a fire or a shooting here in town, all you had to do was look to see that Tommy was around. He knew everything that happened and how it all played out. Will slapped him on the arm and said, "Man, how you been? I just rolled into town and was looking for a friend. There's gonna be a hanging. Tom's excitement showed. Can you come with me to watch it, or do you have to go?" Will waited several moments before he gave reply. "You know that they won't let us. Why would you even try?" "I know a place where they won't see us. We won't even have to hide. Way up in that oak tree, around the other side." Will's manner now grew cautious. "Do you think we should? If they were to catch us, you know it won't be good." "Ah, come on, Will, don't be chicken. We can go right now. We'll already be there before they bring him out." To be a part of this excitement made Will's young heart just pound. If he were to do this thing, he'd have a story to tell that the other boys would envy, a tale straight from hell. Will agreed he'd climb a tree and sit within the sight of a judgment thus completed before the fall of night. He didn't really stop to think just what this would be. He only knew that he and Tom would be hiding in that tree. The climb was pretty easy for boys both tall and thin. They didn't even have to stretch to reach from limb to limb. Soon they leaned against the trunk, perched above the fence. Will knew they had a ringside seat to witness this event. Will could see the hangman's noose and the trapdoor in the deck. That was when he realized this man must fall to break his neck. And just the very thought of it, frankly, made him sick. Tommy, too, had grown silent, as though he got the sense that this was real and life was cruel if this was recompense. The boys both sat there silent. Their excitement had been quelled. They wondered if this outlaw had been condemned to hell. Long steps led to the platform. From them a man appeared. He checked the noose and then the door, made sure they were secure, then retrieved his rifle from where it leaned against the rail. Found his spot to take his watch, make sure that nothing failed. Will knew he was the hangman. His eyes were dark and cold. You'd have to be cold-blooded to snuff out all these souls. Then there was a young man, perched upon the steps, with a star that read "Deputy" pinned upon his chest. Behind him was the parson. He held his hat in hand. Right behind him, bound and shackled, was the poor convicted man. The last one was the sheriff, with a rifle on his arm. This was a job he hated, but he was duly sworn to carry out the sentence that the judge had him informed. They walked him on the platform. They stood him on the door. He tried to stand up straight and tall so all would think him brave, but the tremble in his shoulders let him be betrayed. The man looked not a coward, but instead a mournful soul who wondered how this happened to a boy so free and happy not so long ago. He gazed out to the treetops as if seeking God's embrace, but what he found in searching was the look on young Will's face. I think the man took comfort in knowing what was to come would be a lifelong lesson for one who looked so young. Will watched him put the noose on and tighten up the grip. The hangman moved the knot around, made sure it wouldn't slip. The parson read some scripture. The man looked at Will and winked. He raised his chin and nodded, and then it was all done. They kicked that trapdoor open, and this man's race was run. The noise was like a shot through Will. He felt the need to gasp. It was as if all his air had left and he had breathed his last. Will sat there staring stupidly. He knew the man was dead, But the body just kept jerking, everything below his head. Finally, the body just hung limp, stopped swinging to and fro, and the water running off his boots had now begun to slow. Will and Tommy had been witness to this event that day, and it left a lasting memory that never went away. Will was over 80 when I heard him tell the tale. He was talking to my grandpa. They didn't know I heard. He recalled like it was yesterday, ere forgot a word. Will never shared those events of that fateful day with any of his boyhood friends or even family. He felt it would betray the man who had looked at him that way. He went on to tell my granddad that over all his years, if ever he was tempted, much to his surprise, he'd always get a vision of the look in that man's eyes, and whatever it was tempting him would simply be a lie. He guessed he owed his heart and soul, at least in some small part, to the last man hung in Hangtown and Tommy Carpenter.